the University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.
Good afternoon, FPP participants, academic advisors, and a special warm welcome to Professor Tawana Kupe. Professor Tawana Kupe has been the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Pretoria since 2019. He holds a DPhil in Media Studies from the University of Oslo, Norway. In 2019, he received an honorary doctorate from Michigan State University in the US and another honorary doctorate from the University of Montpellier in France in 2021. He has an impeccable publication record, having authored several journal articles, books, and book chapters in his main discipline, which is media studies and journalism. So it is no surprise that we have asked him to speak to you on a very important aspect of how to transform academic material for the mainstream media. He is an active member of several civil society organizations and is a board member of a number of tertiary education networks, organizations, and net initiatives across the world. Professor Kupe, welcome and thank you so much for making yourself available. We are absolutely delighted, and given your track record in writing for the media, given your own discipline, we could not be more grateful for you to speak to our FPP participants on this important topic. Professor Kupe, can I hand over to you now?
Thank you, Prof. Prof. Menon. You are very generous and kind in your introduction. You said an impeccable publication record. No, I think people on this platform right now have a better record than me in that regard. I've gone, as you know, too early into the management side. But thanks very much.
Professor Kupe?
Yes.
So it's 3:37 now.
Yes.
And perhaps if you can stop at about 4:25 or so.
4:25, yeah.
So that we can allow for a question and answer session at the end of this. And don't feel interrupted, because some of our FPP participants who are here and who represent the brightest talents from across our 26 universities will trickle in as the session continues. So over to you, and I will fade myself out. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And I'd like to echo your words that I feel privileged that I can speak to such a distinguished group of academics and people who are rising stars in our profession. So if I were to, colleagues, and a very good afternoon to you, and thanks for coming to listen to me. So if I were to, if you like, change the title slightly or put the title, give this presentation another title, writing for non-specialist audiences, which is exactly what it is. I have no problem with that. One word I would use is that it's an exercise in translation. And I think Prof. Menon actually did mention already what that means. How do you transform a material that is written in the language of our disciplines, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary areas, in that discourse, the academic discourse that we must perforce write about, that also guarantees the quality and the excellence of our work, into something that is accessible to the generality of the public. If I was to say, from policymakers to ordinary members of the public and others that might just be interested, but not for academic reasons. So it's an exercise in translation, if you like. And so think about it that way. You are translating from one discourse language, if you like, discourses, if you like, into another language in pursuit or in quest to be understood and to inform a broader range of publics and empower them with knowledge. We are also here, if you like, talking about a situation, especially if you're going to do that through the media, is that it's not an institution without its own problems. Some of them I will allude to in the presentation. There are structural issues to do with the media and communication channels. There are structural and compounded issues that has come with the very fact that the media, the concept media is now expanded to include things called social media and self-driven media, if you like, because of the digital technologies that have come into being. So we are operating in an environment where also the translation exercise is becoming a little more complex. But let me, with those preliminary remarks, let me go to my first slide. What do we need as academics need to communicate with the public anyway? Shouldn't we just be communicating among ourselves, which is traditionally what we do, or predominantly what we do, predominantly what we are schooled to do. We've often seen, if you like, public media channels and communication channels is not in our professional domain, but in the domain of others. So we've left it to journalists, media, and other communicators to do the translation exercise. But what stands out is that actually the secondary translators can't quite do it. Or if they're going to do it much more effective, they need the originators of the knowledge, if you like, to be the primary translators and they be the enablers. So understand it in that way. So there are at least 3 reasons that are put down here, and there could be more. Worldwide, there's a rising pressure on institutions of higher learning to take their research into the public domain. This is in recognition of something else that is arisen around the world. The fact that purveyors of disinformation, misinformation, especially using digital platforms, have multiplied and proliferated, and also even seek to contest the knowledge and that we produce, contested even as it is, if you like. But imagine the contestation on knowledge, which is not based on the same ground rules about facts of facticity, if you like, verification, checking, thorough research and all of that. So the space also is now very, very crowded. And reasonably people, if you like, believe that, we should go to institutions that could actually have verification standards, have ways, methodologies that are generally found to be able to take one better, closer to quote unquote, what one would call the truth, or things that are verifiable or can be justified logically, and so on and so forth. So there's a tendency just now generally for people, especially funders and others, and concerned people, let's say Democrats, quote unquote, in the public space, or people who are concerned about the health of society, to say we should actually, in a sense, take up that primary translator role, if you like, working with our secondary enabling translators, that is the media, journalists, and editors, and all of that, to actually take our research into the public domain. Apart from the fact that this research is often also publicly funded, if you like, and to keep it just in the books and journals, and also behind paywalls for some of what the other journal publishing companies do, is actually not justified. It deprives the public, policymakers, and others of sources of information that they could use in their own decision making. So increasingly, you will find that research funders and donors are emphasizing impact and accessibility as prerequisites for grant funding. Let me explain here. They don't mean here impact in the standard way we know it. They are not against impact as we know it. Citation, indexes, Google Scholar indexes, all of those metrics we use in academic institutions to measure the quality of the research. Nobody's saying that that does not matter. But remember, that is actually, to a certain extent, an guarantee to the public that this is quality and can be trusted. But also, it's very much a metric we use internally in academia to measure quality, and also for promotions, for appointments, and those kinds of things. But often what is left out is what is the impact of the work in the public domain or for the public good. So increasingly, many funders now will ask you, what's the impact of your work? Meaning, how does it make a difference to local and global challenges and to a range of phenomena in society, including, by the way, advancing knowledge, important, which is important for democracy in the broad general sense of the word, which is important for public information and so on. And also how accessible is such information. So they are pushing, if you like, the public good argument of the importance of research and saying that there should be some degree of alignment and greater alignment. So what is being spoken about is what I would call societal impact. Does your research make a difference to local and global challenges? And this, I want to emphasize, it's not to the exclusion of fundamental science, fundamental knowledge, curiosity-based research, and so on, because that also has its own societal impact. Society just generally that is informed by research, even of the curiosity type, and also basic research. And basic research is the basis upon which we do what people have traditionally called applied research. I like to call it challenge-led research. And there isn't a dichotomy between those two. But just translating our research metrics into impact in society is becoming important. I've alluded to this third point. The advent of open science and open data is also impelling the move towards publicly accessible science. So that's why you see also people talking about, not having all of this content behind paywalls. And the fact that we have to pay publishers, commercial publishers of journals, for information, for research that is often funded by philanthropists or research funders and donors, and the public fiscus is then, in a sense, being sold back even to the academic community and beyond access, if you like, because of the cost to the generality of the public. Is how to disrupt that kind of environment, and in that way ensure that, if you like, the public, policymakers, and others have access to greater stores of information, especially, as I said, in a way compounded by large-scale disinformation, misinformation, disrespect for facts, disrespect for science, disrespect for knowledge, and suspicion for such, which also fuels, if you like, societal instabilities of one kind or another. But the most important reason for reaching out to the public is, if you can move the slide, is our research is important. The challenge is getting the message out. University researcher has the potential to change the behavior, if you like, and the practices of to change the world. And if policymakers, NGOs, interest groups, and the person on the street are aware of our work and the impact it could have, we could actually, in a sense, address some of those what I call local and global challenges and the nexus between those challenges. Interestingly, as I said earlier on, rushed ahead of myself there, the definition of impact is expanding beyond citations and H indexes and related metrics that we use in academia. So here is an interesting thing that UK Research and Innovations Research Excellence Framework defines impact as, quote, an effect on change or benefit to the economy, society, culture, public policy or services, health, the environment or quality of life beyond academia, if you like, translating that beyond that brilliance in scholarship. I'd like also just to refer you to an interesting book, which ironically actually was launched at UJ in 2018, and I was one of the participants in the launch of that book. It's written by a fellow colleague and academic and a former Vice Chancellor, Professor Chris Brink, who was Vice Chancellor of Stellenbosch, then he was Vice Chancellor of Newcastle in the UK. He wrote a book called The Soul of a University, When Excellence is Not Enough. It's a fascinating book that advances part of the argument that I'm making here, is that universities actually should be more aligned without compromising on the rigor of scholarship, research, and teaching with all of the societal challenges and their intersections that we meet. And that impact should go beyond, if you like, research metrics. Next slide, please. So science is being squeezed out by also other phenomena, apart from the disinformation stuff that I spoke about and the misinformation. It just generally, as I said, structurally, over the years, over the decades, and even now nearly perhaps a century, the structural transformations of the media are an orientation to things that are not irrelevant. I'm not saying that these things we should not enjoy, but also the space and the airtime that these things take and compete with the public, what I call public-oriented or public good information, vis-a-vis, if you like, the information we need, as opposed to the information we want, if you like, need being something that is as vital as oxygen, want being something that is your tastes, your cravings, and things that are interesting. I'm not saying, by the way, some colleagues on the platform here who are in my domain, media studies, will tell you that, popular culture is not inimical to democracy, and is not inimical to understanding. It has its contributions. But also it is true that the structural transformations of the media tend to produce a one-sided affair. So as academics, we are competing with soapies, celebrities, quiz shows, and realms of social media content for the attention of the public. And inevitably, you don't quite win this, especially in media systems that are highly commercialized and for-profit entities. At the same time, the media space for science and public interest material is shrinking, especially since the outbreak of COVID-19, which saw so many media outlets shutting down and journalists using their jobs. So you have this, if you like, ever shrinking public space for the things that we actually need to know, in the interest for things that we want to know. And also the purveyors of misinformation and disinformation competing in that particular kind of space. So to use a metaphor, where we are offering the equivalent of healthy home-cooked meals, many media consumers have a growing taste for fast food, because that is essentially predominantly what they are exposed to. And what you are exposed to in the media space tends to shape what is then said, that is what you want, or that is what you need. Whereas actually it's not just a chicken and egg situation, is what are you being offered, and what has made you expect media to offer. How do we compete without compromising the nutritional value of our work, is what, in a sense, is what I'm trying also to speak about to you today. Next slide, please. So, and this is how, if you like, I'm going to give you some kind of how-to in this translation business. I hope it doesn't sound too very simplistic, but I thought I should really go down to some of the techniques and abilities. There is a whole theory around that. It's also about understanding the public and audiences or consumers of media, not as if just homogeneous block, but also as people that are actually discerning, intelligent, and if given in understandable and accessible ways, would actually be interested and not only simply choose the fast food. So here are some 6 key guidelines at the very least for writing for the public. You never underestimate the intelligence of the reading public. People actually understand more than you do. So this is not an exercise. Why I put this up, colleagues, is that often in my career as an academic and talking to colleagues about us doing this, they were often concerned, rightly so, about dumping down complex intellectual arguments, complex information, complex research conclusions in ways in which, if you like, defy and frankly cringeworthy and reduce the value of what is often complex analysis that should not be understood in a simplistic way. That is not what I'm talking about here. Is that let's also think on the other side. And here, if we had a lot of time, I'll do a bit of a lecture on reception theory. Reception theory in media studies shows that actually audiences are not as unsophisticated as we think. What perhaps defeats them is highly sophisticated discourses beyond their own access that enables that closes out access to them. So always think that you are talking to an intelligent person on the other side. You are not dumping down what you are actually trying to say. You are actually, in a sense, making it much more accessible and contextually relevant and relating to the things that people know. Say a fare that is relevant, newsworthy, and empowering. Relevance is very, very important. People seek information because in one way or another, it resonates with their own life worlds and their own context. And I use life worlds deliberately, not just their individual experience, but the individual experience in a larger social context. That might be a community, it might be a nation, it might be a continent, it might be just a globe. The newsworthy. I'll come to talking about the newsworthy element about it, not without some difficulty. And I'm going to give a view of what newsworthy means in the context of communicating, if you like, what we academics actually produce. And also empowering. People seek information because somehow or the other, they want to use it to, at the most, change their circumstances or better understand their circumstances or better find a balance, better find urgency to resolving their own issues, if you like. So in another sense, something that is not necessarily going to depress them and feel that they are incapable and not in control. Right for the channel or medium you are targeting. So in the media space as well, there's a lot of differentiation of if one sticks to print media, for example, there will be highbrow, for lack of a better word, highbrow publications as well as what we call lowbrow publications. So tabloids, for example, are generally not interested in the kind of stuff that would necessarily write. Depends, of course, in different countries what kind of tabloids they are. There are countries where tabloids are mixed media. So, and also there might be channels or mediums that seek to aggregate audiences, reach both the higher end, highly educated people, and people that are, educated in the making, and people that, have some degree of literacy. Use plain language and not academic discourse. I mean, this could have been a title for what I'm talking about. So academic discourse is important for delivering on what we are as academics. And its audiences are largely academic audiences, and those audiences that, if you like, have an academic background or understanding and can access this language. So using plain language is very, very important. The fear among some other colleagues is that using plain language might be the beginning of damping down. No, it is actually a way of being able to be communicative or communicative. If you use academic discourse and you get to know what, you are not communicating, if you like. You are not empowering, and also you are essentially being, if you like, being inaccessible. Keep your writing short and sharp. If you have noticed in the media space, if I keep with print media, for example, is that a sentence can be a paragraph. Whereas in academia, of course, a paragraph cannot just be one sentence. And as an academic in media studies, I used to run a professional master's degree for those journalists who wanted to transform from being practitioners, probably had an honors degree or an undergrad, but lots of work experience, into perhaps a greater understanding. So I'll give them a compulsory course in media theory, and also then they could do some of the more practically oriented courses, but immersed in theory. So one of the things I had to teach them, especially when I gave them the first essay, or when they had marked their first essay, they would find that I'd spoken a lot about what a paragraph means in academia. It's not a single sentence, but in the media it is, and that the sentences are generally much shorter and sharper. Whereas in academia, because we want to capture complexity, nuance, and also things are not that certain, often our sentences are much longer, in multiple parts, and also not necessarily direct and to the point. So you might say then, how do you bridge this between not dumping down and writing short and sharp? It's actually, it's also an exercise in condensing in ways that are actually accessible. So a series of much shorter sentences with plain language and so on, building upon each other. Principle is still the same, but you are using less words, if you are like, you are using less caveats, if you like, but also without losing the nuance and the complexity of something. Then also, I think it's useful to tell a story. Colleagues, life is actually about stories or narratives. Everybody is a narrative and a story about their life. However, glorious their life is, or however sad, or somewhere in between, it's a story. Stories are generally, we've all grown up in many different cultures. That's one thing common about all cultures. The storytelling or narratives play a role in how people think of themselves, their community, their family, their society, and how people think of the world. So sometimes as academics, I think the best way, if you want to communicate what you do, is give it in narrative form or in story form. Just generally, when media research is done, things that are told in narratives and stories, because it relates to people's lives, find that there is greater attraction for audiences and greater readership, if you like. Next slide. So here I'm elaborating, if you like, and so excuse me, colleagues, if I don't repeat me, if I repeat myself. So respect the intelligence of the audience. Never talk down to an audience. Always show respect, and that's very, very important, because also what we want to do in this translation exercise, want to reduce the gap between we being seen as elite, superior beings who know better than others, and also without actually divesting of the fact that we know more because we've done the research and have the education, got the degrees, if you like. That in a sense, it gives us the power to be condescending. The best ethical form of communication, if you want to influence people, is actually to put yourself first as human beings on the same level. Yes, there's an asymmetry of knowledge, but what is being needed is that you actually reduce that asymmetry of knowledge by transferring through translation knowledge to the other person that does not know. So you take a persuasive, respectful posture, if you like, and you give examples and you make equations or allusions and resonances to the other person's life. The preference most modern readers have for short, punchy writing in plain languages does not reflect on their intelligence. More likely, actually, it reflects their desire to save time in a world where time is precious. Lack of time is also often a reason why people buy fast food. Remember also, there is just generally a deluge of information that now goes to people through particularly their handheld devices, mobile phones in the first instance, and other gadgets. People have access to so many things in the very same second. WhatsApp messages coming, SMS for those who still use it, email for those with email on their videos, and all manner of things coming their way. So we have to compete, if you like, in that particular space. So the time factor applies also to specialists too. In fact, note this comment from UK's government's guidelines for digital publishing, and there I quote, the more educated a person is and the more specialist their knowledge, the more they want it in plain English. Sorry, colleagues, it was the transition or to load shedding, but my generator is back on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Prof.
Okay, right. These people often have the least time and most to read, which means they just want to understand your point and move on quickly. So the book is not just for non-specialist audiences. The book is also for specialist audiences that are actually pressed for time, but might not be specialists in that particular domain, if you like. Next slide, please. Then relevance and newsworthiness. The media cover topics that are happening now. That's one definition of newsworthy, and are relevant to their readers. Not everything is newsworthy. The news editor, the publication concerned, digital or print, is the judge of what newsworthy and what is newsworthy and what is not. Colleagues, I'm not saying that this is not problematic, because also remember that I'm coming here from a point of view of not saying media is good. We academics are not good because we use academic discourses or jargon, as people actually often say. Is that yes, there are also weaknesses about the media, and one could be there are multiple PhD theses written on the notion of whether newsworthy is what it should be. But just generally, if you like, newsworthiness is the immediate, the happening now, if you like, and then is adjudicated on the basis of whether it has any relevance to readers. Of course, the context matters. What's relevant to some people in some area might not. So a person who's the professional news editor at a publication concerned is the judge of what is newsworthy and what is not. This imposes a burden on us as academics who want to communicate through these platforms to better understand newsworthiness and relevance for each publication. Next slide, please. Some examples of material that tend to interest the media, for example, is breaking news that is happening now. I made that point. The key to capitalizing on this is to sit down right now and write a piece that can be sent out immediately. Any delay can mean a lost opportunity. Colleagues, I'll be quite frank with you, is that this is one of the hurdles you have to overcome. When I started off writing for the media myself, well, of course, I had one advantage. I had a whole PhD in media studies, if you like. I knew how the media works, but that didn't necessarily help when a journalist would call me and say, this has happened. Can you write something now for publication tomorrow? And the guy is calling me at 1 o'clock and he says, I want the piece by 4 o'clock. That's the deadline for publication. I'm used to writing journal articles, book chapters, and even my lecture over multiple days and rethinking and reimagining the whole thing and going to read elsewhere. This is wanted right now and on deadline, if you like. Now, as academics, of course, you are concerned about what you send out in public. It means something to your reputation. Do you want to write something now that you can't even run against another colleague and get their comments, which is traditionally how we write? So, but the media actually, in a sense, often want it now. Disease outbreak, floods, accidents, a large fire, all of those kinds of things. Because for them, they want to be able to actually provide something to their readers or listeners or viewers on an immediate basis. So one of the things we have to learn actually as academics is, transcending that mental block that you have about writing immediately. But remember what I said earlier on. If you use plain language, you are short and to the point, and you write actually based on what you actually know. This is not so insurmountable a task, if you like, but you have to learn it really over time and practice over and over again. Anything new and significant or the first of its kind, note that one needs to be very sure that an innovation or development is indeed the first of its kind. So again, because remember that very importantly, we academics must maintain our reputation, otherwise we join the other brigade that has no respect for science, claims anything and everything when it is not true. So here I've given you some of the examples. Meet Erica, she is having a laugh. Robots paint, then laugh, what's next? And so they like those, there's if you like, one way of putting this is that media also often like, and readers often like, is been shown by multiple forms of research, what is called human interest dimensions. How relevant is this human beings? How novel is this? Or how new is this? Or how surprising this is? Next slide, please. And human or animal interest, sorry, I was running ahead of myself. Stories of overcoming obstacles to succeed are perennially popular. For example, in our institution, we published a story. The media loved the UP press release headed, "She's perfect now." Meet the adorable Kitty that became the first cat in South Africa to have a partial knee replacement. So you can imagine how people thought that surgery for cats and also replacing a whole knee. So it wasn't just animal lovers only, but the novelty of this. But there was scientific advancement in this surgery for cats, which were often associated more with human beings. Forecasts, predictions, and trends backed by reliable facts and figures. Virtually any discipline can actually capitalize on this, because people are always ever, I feel like, grappling for a better understanding of their lives and in these contextual realities, lives of their communities and others and so on. So forecast, predictions, and trends, especially if you can provide from your research reliable facts and figures and comparisons, is something that is also quite popular. Anomalies, the unexpected and the unusual. Stevie the robot, we have a robot working in our academic hospital at Steve Biko. Stevie the robot, to help with patient care at Steve Biko Hospital, was another well-covered UP press release. So what is Stevie? It's a robot one, so it speaks to this whole notion of the fourth industrial revolution, but also it's a robot working together in a hospital with human beings. So what Stevie simply does, colleagues, is that Stevie is a robot that connects doctors in South Africa with doctors in Germany at the bedside of a patient with real-time information, including, if you like, patient information or information that can be measuring pulse rate, heart rate, all of that can be done with the machines connected to Stevie, and Stevie displays that on a screen. And the doctors can also communicate in real time, just be in front of it. So writing this kind of story as a medical advancement is of interest to the public, because public is ever interested in whether healthcare is improving, and also introducing this kind of technology also makes the so-called 4IR something that is real world meaning, and not stories about robots acting against human beings and others. So contextual relevance, human relevance, advancement, science, and all of that actually is also something that media often would like. So think about your own research and what is new. Doesn't have to be all digital, all robotic, all technology. As I say, virtually any discipline can capitalize on many of these things. Next slide, please. Right for the channel or medium you are targeting, style and format. Familiarize yourself with publications' preferred editorial style by reading it regularly. I learned how to do this also by being a regular reader of certain newspapers. I wrote, by the way, for information, at least for two large newspapers. First, it was the Sunday Times I wrote for 5 years or something, in another 7 years or so or more for City Press, and then in between other publications like Financial Mail and other magazines, if you like. And my column was about media performance and whether the media was actually doing a good job of what it ought to do from a theoretic standpoint of view, and what our audiences needed to do about something. And also I made judgments about their professional, their ethics and their professionalism and so on. And there were times when I was much busier and I would have to write papers much more frequently than once a week. So what I had to do was actually because each publication often has a different ways in which it will format stories and their style. So for example, some news sites like to sum up the essence of an article upfront in 3 succinct bullet points. Those of you who like to follow news, you will see this very much in News 24 online. News 24 always is in bold, 3 bullet points about the essence of a story. So the reader can then determine, am I interested in this? What is this about? Remember also, if you are reading in digital formats, data, time on screen, all of that actually matters. So choosing what to know. So if you like, this is a teaser, but also it's something similar to what we do in academia, writing an intro or a summary or an abstract upfront, so somebody knows what it is about. It's the same kind of logic, if you like. The length of a piece is key. Opinion pieces should be between 750 and 1,000 words. Normally, they will tell you upfront, and they don't compromise on this. And you can't say the matter is so complex, I need 1,200 or 2,000 words, because they're also concerned about readership and also space constraints. Few publications have the time and resources to cut copy that is overlong. So copy means the draft that you submit, that is called copy in media. And somebody has to look at it. And also, if you like, look at the grammar, the language, all of that, the commas are in the right place and do some stylistic changes. The best way to get published is to hit the number word exactly. If they say send a piece between 750 and 1,000 words, either do 750 or anything in between, or do the maximum 1,000 words if you like. Then there are people called sub-editors that will actually scrutinize also what you have written. Again, remember the earlier principles: short, sharp, short, plain, interesting examples in it, and all of that, or comparisons in it, but keep it moving if you like, and also keep it like a story is sometimes the best way to do it. Unless the piece is an advertorial or sponsored, that is paid for, the news editor will decide whether it is worthy of being placed or not. So be prepared also that they might turn it down and say, no, it's not what we actually, in a sense, expected. So there is some degree of trial and error here until you do. I mean, in my whole, like 12 years or 15 years of writing, Sunday columns for the 2 newspapers I mentioned and other magazines in between, where I was writing once a month, I never actually got a totally rejected article. Sometimes editors, yes, and sub-editors sent it back to me to say, can you explain a little more of this? This is not clear enough. Prof, you are now using jargon. What is this? It sounds interesting, but can you make it simpler and so on? So just like we submit articles and books and book chapters, and there is especially for journals, there is a rejection rate. There is an element of something like that, but it's not as harsh, if you like, quote unquote harsh. It's not as harsh as what we find in our journals. They are actually, if you know your stuff and you follow some of the things that I'm saying here, it's more likely than not to be published. You might be disappointed sometimes that it's cut short and something is left out, but it's good if you send it in time. They will send it back to you and say, are you happy with this? Can we go with it? And then you go with it. Sometimes, of course, there's no time like that. I've submitted stuff on deadline myself and said, well, it is what it is. And it has kind of come out not too bad here. Next slide, please. I know I should stop in about 10 minutes. I hope I'm moving along nicely. Use plain language and not academic discourse. I think I've overspoken on this word, if on this slide, if you like. Academics are expecting, we as academics are expecting our own face, but we cannot expect others to be. Just keep with that. And that also our expertise is actually respected. So writing for in the media, colleagues, is not an exercise in defending yourself or proving that you know. You must start from those points that they've chosen you, or you actually know what you do. You want to share it with the public. You are confident in it. You want that best way of making sure that people understand what you say. So again, I won't repeat, use plain language and keep it simple. We are writing for the public, not for scientists or peers. When there is no alternative but to use a scientific or technical team, explain it in plain language. So it's not as if they don't want that either. But the issue is you must translate it again, and using analogies sometimes is better. Avoid unnecessary acronyms. They clutter text and are very hard to read, and often some people don't know what the acronym stands for. Next slide, please. Turning your research into reader-friendly writing. Make a match, look for synergies between your research and a topic or debate that is currently being aired in the media. Remember, what you're trying to do is using the notion that sometimes people will understand best something if it is related to something that they know, or analogies are made between something that they know. Remember that people are not completely without knowledge. It might not be knowledge in that specific thing, but find something that is similar and say it works the same ways, except that this is where it is different, if you like. That's where you have space actually to capture those nuances, those complexities, those intricacies. You also have space, by the way, to also say that, something is not completely clear, but what it looks like is the following, and the research shows the following, and also to say more research is going to be done, will need to be done in this particular kind of area. So there is leeway actually to give something that is fairly balanced and something that is not just, wrongly conclusive or black and white when it is not. Also, consider how your research can add a fresh dimension to that debate. What has not already been said, and how could you contribute and shed a new light on the subject? Does your research offer a solution to the problem or challenge at hand? So that also both readers and media like is what possibly could be the solutions. Yeah, this is a depressing case. This is a very difficult situation, but what are the pathways out of that? And how sustainable are those pathways? What should the public be looking at, or policymakers should be looking at? Is there a society or group of individuals or organizations that navigated the same problem and was able to come out that way? And also, if you can back it up also with some of the research that you have done, is also actually in a sense helpful. Because remember that empowering notion. People are not just looking for problems. They're also looking for solutions, quote unquote. But as we know, as academics, we don't offer pie in the sky solutions or solutions that are not grounded in research. And that is why it's important actually to have that kind of grounding. Next slide, please. Turning your research into reader-friendly writing. So ask yourself what target audience you want to reach and what message you want to convey to them. So for example, the generality of the public is broad. So sometimes you might actually be wanting to target policymakers or groups of people you think are most affected by something and don't understand something. So your message would be primarily, if you like, directed at that, what we call a target audience is the primary audience, but there's a secondary audience that might also have an interest in that. So ask yourself, how relevant is your message to that audience and why should they care? And also you can actually be very direct about this. This is why this is important for you to understand. It will XYZ in your life or XYZ in your publication, and research shows my findings are that 1, 2, 3, 4, if you like. And also people want to have like that in some kind of related package. And also you might also be wanting to say to people, well, you actually, it's in your power, in your hand to do the following. So it's what we call a call to action. that you can make on your piece. The call to action is not made out of your opinion, your desires. The call to action must also arise from the research that you have done. For example, if you are writing about your research on corruption, what do you think leaders as individuals can do to combat that? You could say, for example, is that people should actually participate in preventing corruption by reporting corrupt activities, not giving bribes themselves, using whistleblower lines and all of that, and acting together to actually expose corruption. And also you would have given the examples of, what corruption is and how corrupt practices work. There is a person who's corrupting someone and one who's making a bribe, and there's all sorts of complicit. So you could say, do not be complicit. If you know of corruption and you have the evidence, these are safe ways in which you can report it. So that is also actually, in a sense, because newspaper media or newspapers or print media, any media for that matter, also see themselves as change agents in society. Next slide, please. So now that you know what you want to tell the audience and you are convinced this is something they care about, start writing. Write an attention-grabbing introduction. By that, I don't mean sensationalist, factless stuff. Saying something unexpected can work well, as can a strong fact or the beginning of an antidote. You have to draw people in. And remember that people are inundated with all manner of things. So something has to actually attract your attention about what you say. It's like a jolt, if you like. Focus on one idea or issue and have one clear objective per paragraph. Be selective. Don't try to cover too much ground. Be brief on background. Use interesting details and unknown facts. So remember, I said that in the media, a sentence is a paragraph. So actually, that is also how you use that kind of technique. Next slide, please. I think I have only 3 minutes now. Express your opinion if you are writing an opinion piece, that is, and then base it on factual research or first-hand information. When you are finished building your argument, wrap the piece up neatly. Here it can be useful to remind the reader without repeating yourself why the topic is important, and then make your call to action if you like. If it is a piece where you want to make a call to action. Then use short paragraph, long ones are dense and unreadable. I've said that before. Remember to include a punchy headline. Also on this one, they might not use your headline. Typically the headline is done by a person called, they were traditionally men, but the gender has changed. It's much more gender equal now, or different genders to it. That person is called a sub-editor. They do the final headlines. There's something else they are aiming at, attracting readers to that story and to the entirety of the publication if it's print. So they will take something out of your article and also something that they know works for them. This often can cause distress to academics because the headline overpromises something that is a little more nuanced and much more complex. The aim of a headline is to grab the reader's attention, so do not attempt to tell the whole story in it. Use interesting cross-headings to break up the text visually and keep the reader interested. This also, depending on the publication, they might actually do it for you, but they will also run it past you so that it's not actually misleading. Next slide, please. I should be getting to the end. I said before, tell a story rather than starting at point A and systematically plotting to point, if you like, to point Z. This is not an essay set. Yeah, it must be logical, but even in narrative and storytelling, there is a logic to how the story develops and even the twists and turns to it. The opening sentence should get straight to the point of the piece. Put the news first, not in the conclusion. So quite a lot of, sometimes we academics are used to, if you like, the whole thing being revealed in the end, right? But whereas actually you might actually, they wanted you to front load it and then to, if you like, go backwards. Because also that's how they're going to cut. They often cut starting from the bottom. So if the stuff is at the bottom, then you might actually lose the essence of what you want to say. Use your best information in the front of the piece. What I'm saying, when writing for the public, there's no such thing as really keeping the best for last. Then next slide, please. Identify the 3 points you want to make and make them in the top half of the piece. Appeal to the reader's self-interest. Explain how the topic affects their lives. Relevance, very important. Contextual relevance is important. Use anecdotes, short, amusing, or interesting stories about real people or incidents to illustrate the point you are making. And then, getting to the end now, remember your advantages. Writing for non-specialist audiences can be hard work for an academic. The good news is that we have some advantages. Expertise, remember I said this to you earlier. We know our fields inside, out, and can easily assemble the most relevant, newsworthy information available. Keep that confidence, don't lose it. Trust, in an age of misinformation, academics are well-versed in verifying facts and validating figures, not to mention rigorous peer review processes. This can add to the credibility of our work when we write for non-specialized audiences. I think I will stop there, and then as Prof. Menon said, then people might want to ask me some questions. I hope you found it not over too practical and also not that intellectually stimulating. But I can tell you, when I did it myself, I found the same joy I found in writing academic pieces, whether it's journals, journal articles, introductions to edited books or sole written books.
Thank you so much, Professor Kupe. I think your take-home messages are so critical for those who are our rising stars, our future professors. The 3 key messages that I've taken from your talk, and dear FPP participants, I'm going to give you a chance to ask Professor Kupe, who's now in the hot seat, questions. You can just use the function to raise your hand, and we can then take some questions. But I think that you've drawn our attention to the fact that the university is not a corporate. We have a social function, and the link to what we are doing in academia to society is a link that cannot be broken, and that using popular media to tell the story and to share knowledge with the public, to Joseph or to whichever audience we choose, is part also of dissemination of knowledge, which is also an absolutely critical task. I liked the analogy that you drew, that academics can provide nutritional meals to the public. And that's quite an important take-home message. And it's quite revealing in that we are fed fast food most of the time, and you've given us some really valuable tips for how to structure and how to think through when translating one's own discipline or findings or innovations into the popular media. Let me stop there and see if we have a round of questions. Dear participants, you can put your question in chat, but even more appropriate, you can put your hand up and let's take some questions.
There's Matavo, I think, is a hand up.
Matabo?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. It was an interesting session. I would like to find out from you, have you ever written in your mother tongue? I don't know which one that is, and how did you manage that in a context of multilingualism and trying to get the knowledge and information to everyone in an equally accessible manner? Thank you.
Should I answer, Prof. Menon?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Well, my mother tongue is so tiny. No one would publish in it. It's called Karanga, not Karanga. Kalanga from Botswana and Zim. So they stopped using it a long time ago. Although I speak it perfectly, I only write it on WhatsApp to my mom, although we both speak English. She was my grade 1 and 2 teacher. So, but you raise an important point. Part of the problem we have, especially in print media, is that we do not have many publications in African languages. Although they are thriving isiZulu newspapers, by the way, in KZN. And also, I think those who write in isiZulu might have a better answer to you if they have written. So I know from colleagues who do research in that space that some people actually do write there. The problem is, I think, as you hinted, Matabo, is that the way we have lost usage of our mother tongue languages or indigenous languages or African languages, better still, especially in talking and writing about academic subjects, is a real pity. It deprives a generality of the public in understanding things. On the other hand, on radio, for example, I didn't refer much to radio, so those some of the things in interviews pertain to the same things, and in interviews you are given even a much shorter time. Some of the principles are outlined very much matter. Then once or twice, even I can speak to some degree isiZulu because I learned it in high school. I've been asked by Ukozi FM, for example, to actually comment on something on isiZulu. It showed the limitations of my loss of African languages, but I was able to do something that was decent, and also to approach, to reach a very large audience, because Ukozi FM is one of the largest radio stations in Africa, reaching 19 million listeners a day. On TV, they've often also asked me, could you say this in another African language? Because we have TV stations that also broadcast in African languages. I think we suffer a handicap as academics in that even when it's our mother tongue, we often think we can't explain these scientific things or knowledge things in our own languages. I think it's what one English poet called mind forged manacles. In other words, it's a manacles or shackles that are in our mind. We should just actually simply speak and say it in that. So if our African language newspapers expanded or print media expanded, we should, for those of us who can be able to write that in those languages, and we will even reach wider audiences. And some papers, by the way, the ones that are very good and sharp, they see something in an African language, they might want it translated into an English or Afrikaans or some other language version. So not completely matter with a satisfactory answer, in part because this is not a general practice. And secondly, I haven't had a chance actually to write in my own mother tongue, which doesn't, or write in isiZulu, something that I could master to some degree if I put my mind to it.
Right, sorry, I myself have muted myself. Prof. Kupe, I wonder if we could ask you, some of our FPP participants are in very complex disciplines, focusing on water research or molecular chemistry or analytical chemistry, and finding the synergy as to what would the public want to know. Because sometimes your thoughts are so focused on your discovery in terms of your scientific endeavors. How do you know when something will be relevant? So if I can ask on behalf of all the complex scientists that we have in the room.
Yeah, so I think very good question, Prof. Menon. I think the question you should ask yourself is, why am I doing this and what does it matter? And again, don't think that the audience are not that intelligent. And also then use analogies. Why is molecular biology important? What does the findings they lead to in terms of applications, not necessarily immediate ones? Or why is not knowledge by nature important? Doing all of that rigorous science might train you into doing what, on being able to what? Why should the public, if you like, be interested in matter? And I think using analogies and other things actually does matter. Part of the problem is, I think I'm quite sure you speak about in this group, is that and why the decolonization and decoloniality knowledge production is important. We've created boundaries or silos between what we think is very complex scientific things and knowledge things and everyday life and the life of our people, partly because we have no access to indigenous knowledge systems, which have their own abstractions and systems of thought and theories, for example. But if you start from the point of view, why am I doing this? Why is this interesting? Am I spending so much time on it? And what could it matter? You will find that there's a wealth of stories there that you could tell and that analogies that you could actually make. So always start from that point of view is that how could I interest people in this? So let's say young women in high school are not taking up engineering and then, or want to be engineers, but do not then take maths. Why should you actually, in a sense, like, how should you target them and say, you want to be an engineer, this is why it's important for you to take mathematics. And look through so and so, who's actually a female engineer and is leading this company, if you like. So we have so very many angles. This thing is always about angle, something that people haven't exactly thought about. And even some of the basic human factors where the engineering appears so simple, but it's driven by something nobody ever talks about, what the principle behind it.
I want to thank you, Professor Kupe, for your presentation. You practiced what you preached. It was really clear, inspirational, and knowledgeable. And you're really talking about a literacy capability that is actually very difficult for academics, I have learned. So I think my question is, what does it take to actually develop that capability to write for other audiences? I mean, would it include unlearning what, our writing styles, academic writing styles? What would it really take to get that right?
A very, very difficult question, Prof, but an interesting one that I almost speak with my colleagues for a lot of time. But let me just say that I don't believe it's unlearning our academic writing styles, because I think that we must simply start from the point of view that there are many different writing styles for different purposes and for different audiences. So the academic writing style must still remain there. Although some of our academic writing styles actually sometimes is not that it's not that good, if you like, if you know, and you can see between different authors and different writers that writing on the same thing, you find something much more attractive. I think it's something that we have to do in practice because we are not necessarily trained to do it in our education. That is why this course is called Science Communications. I don't like the word science communication because often it implies the scientific disciplines. We should just simply call it research communications, right? So that it covers many different fields of endeavor. So there is Stellenbosch runs some. We also at UP are now starting some programs, which will be both short and long courses, graduating into a degree. Iowa State University in the US was once, I think, a leader, and I think Ohio as well, once a leader in science communication degree programs from master's all the way to a PhD level. Because it's something that, just like we're to learn academic writing, the kind of writing I'm telling you about also has to be learned. Even in the journalistic field, we have an expression that someone has a flair for writing. And you might find that they were never really taught writing. By reading and relating to other styles, self-taught, if you like, then they have a flair for writing. But many journalists actually have to be taught writing. And also in the newsroom or in publishing houses, the constant corrections, it's like an academic marking assignments for students say, this is not how you write. We have to learn this. It's just that it appears overwhelming in everything we have to do that you now have to add another skill over and above the skill that you do. And I say here at UP is that let's see it as a continuum from academic writing on the one end to writing for the generality of the public on the other hand. So you're actually mastering different forms of writing for different sorts of audiences. That way, I think it lessens the mental block. But also, once you bridge that gap, it becomes very, very exciting because actually sometimes you understand better what you're trying to do if you like now want to write it to explain to an audience that is not your peers. Because if I'm speaking at a seminar, giving a keynote address or teaching a class of students, I assume certain bases of knowledge. So there's many shorthands to what I say and what I do. I assume that you did your 101 in first year, you are now in third year, I don't. But now if you're writing for generality of the public, that 101 in chemistry is not there. You also have to condense it into what chemistry is about and make analogies to real life. So sure,
Yes.
it's not unlearning as such, it's adding another, writing competency to your repertoire of writing skills. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Prof. Kupe, we have a question from Sabelo. Sabelo?
So, very much for that presentation. I'm sorry that I had a bit of load shedding at some point. So, I mean, yeah, essentially what you are saying is that we almost have to flip around how we write, right?
Yes.
So instead of telling a story and then eventually coming to a conclusion, saying give people, like give them the news, tell them what the story is about before even, and that's, essentially that's not how we, that generally, at least in my field, that's not how you would write.
Absolutely.
So I just wonder where we're supposed to land it, or is it up to us as academics to say, well, perhaps let me summarize every academic paper that I publish and try and write it in a much more simpler fashion to a, I don't know, lay audience or newspaper or whatever. Because I mean, I guess maybe one of the things that we sort of get exposed to, which is not even close to that, is maybe the conversation, which in itself, it's still, I guess it's still also quite academic in a way, because you're still assuming that people have a certain level of understanding of the topic that you're talking about. So yeah, and it's just something that we're not taught, and we're not teaching to our students also. So how, I guess maybe you've just touched on that, and how do we get around that?
No, I think somebody have hit the nail on the head. It's like, starting with your conclusion instead of starting with the intro as such. So your conclusions from your research become your intro in the story, if you like. And you are grappling with something that is important, which I was trying to say when I was answering Ed, is that we now actually have to consciously say we have to provide some training and teaching in universities for this. It's not something we can just leave to chance. Those who can. As you know, some academics, and I was one of them, partly because I had a media background and interest, and I also in my earlier degrees were in literature, storytelling, and all of that. So I had familiarity, if you like. It's not something we can give to chance for everybody. We have to be really intentional about it, because the intention is greater. It's actually sharing knowledge with the public in order to influence change. You can't leave that to chance. So that is why at University of Pretoria, we're introducing courses, short courses, as well as longer range courses and certificated courses. And we work together with the Conversation Africa to do that. We run actually masterclasses in actually how you actually do this and how you can turn this into podcasts and other related media. Because if we do that, you'll be surprised. Everybody on this platform would be able to do it. I have no doubt about that. But right now, lodged in our minds an idea that I really can't do this. And also, so Sabelo, one thing is I want just to add to everybody else is that also imagine if those guys, you went to primary school with high school and did not proceed like you did. And they're so proud of you. You go back to the township or in the rural area elsewhere, or even in the suburbs where you live, and you are at dinner at a party, they are like proud of you. They say, yeah, what do you do? So what does it matter? What is your research about? We're so proud of you. You're going to be a professor now. Tell us what you do. And I was boasting to my friends saying, now he's here now. And that happens to me quite a lot. And I have to actually tell them, and I can't use scientific language, and they ask me, so is COVID for real? Isn't this COVID an American conspiracy? Now I have to start explaining about viruses and all of that in a language that they will understand. And they are normally listening very attentively because they respect that you are the knowledge source, if you like. But they're also reading all of this other disinformation stuff. So think about it that way. I often say also to some of my students, my grandmother she's late now, of course, she used to ask me about some of these things. What is this about? And I had to explain to her in my language and make analogies about things that she knew in her life. I don't think it was completely satisfactory, but at the times I saw her nod her head that she got an idea of what that was. And as time went on, I heard her now start to infuse some English words into what she said. She was completely illiterate, by the way.
Prof. Kupe, we have a question from Portia, and I'm going to first let Portia ask, and then we've got a question from, I'm sure you are no stranger to
Yeah,
Professor
no,
Everard Weber,
of
who
course.
is an academic advisor on the program, just like Kertu asked you the question before.
Yeah.
So Portia, go with your question.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Prof, for the beautiful presentation. We got to learn a lot. So now this is just for interest's sake.
Yeah.
The youth that we have in South Africa. I'm asking this because in the tourism sector, we are learning that the future traveler will be the youth, and they tend to be interested in a TikTok sort of like advertising. Now, considering the print media that we're supposed to think about, how can one navigate such? Thank you so much.
Okay. No, thank you. Good question. Prof. Weber, are you good? I think we're going to take.
Can I go?
Yes.
Prof, hi. Great listening to you. I was just thinking that there's a wider discussion, isn't it, about the relationship between the university and the community it is supposed to serve. And Tux is it's a very different place, let's say, from the University of Fort Hare. The immediate context is very different. But there's that broader issue about the university in relation to the community it serves. And it forms part, I think, of the bigger debate, ongoing debate at the moment about university knowledge. And you know, who are we writing for, and so on. All the issues that you've been discussing. I just wanted to point out to our cohort to remind them that the NRF has a special program that funds this kind of research. I forget what it's called, something about community-based. That is research that makes a difference to the immediate communities. So there is money that is available, and I know some of the people in our cohort, they look, for example, at questions of problems of water scarcity and so on. And this, some of the members in our cohort do this by working in surrounding communities. And the research can have an immediate impact. So there is funding for this type of work. And then the last point I just want to make is that this is also a respectable method of research. It is called action research. You work with a community, formulate a research problem, and there are many people who wouldn't call their work action research, but they want to make a difference to the field, to the academic field, but as they do so, they also want to make a difference in practice. So many scholars try and combine both. So thanks, Prof. Good to see you. The last time we spoke, I think you were at WITS.
Yeah.
I was at the EPU.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's great. Great to hear you and good to see you. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. I mean, nothing to add to what you said. You're quite correct. Is remember where I started. Portia, I'll come to you to just say because I need some navigation in yours. Remember where I started off is that it's actually this exercise in writing or communicating. I use writing as one example, and Portia is quite right about. You can talk about print media, but what about other forms of media? I'll come to that. Communicating in knowledge to publics is a way of bringing the university closer to communities and not just telling them, but also a rousing call to action, but also working with them. As you say, action research. So very good points here. So Portia, I think you pointed the weakness of my presentation as well. It was simply in the interest of time, trying to choose one medium and give you a concrete example of how you can do it. Of course, all media are sort of work with narratives. So the TikTok works with the visual narratives. There is method to the madness in TikTok as well. But of course, in TikTok is often what we call self-representation. People are trying to tell their own story by representing themselves. But equally as academics, I think the medium does not exclude us. We should get into the space. But the challenge, as you hinted, is the target audience being the youth and the kinds of languages in youth culture and ways of understanding things. And that is where I think we bridge the gap, because communication is about bridging various gaps as well. Understanding cultures, understanding narratives, and using stories. Youth prefer visual narratives and stories precisely because there's been such an explosion of visual media because of digitization and digital platforms. But I often look at those TikTok self-representation, and I see a person is trying to tell a story about their being and themselves. Then I often say to my colleagues is we must get into that and also learn. And also remember in TikTok, again, brevity. And also the first impression telling your story, what is this about or what are you about? Is very important in that regard. So, and I think that we should, you go where the audiences are, and also you learn the cultures, you learn the modes of storytelling and the modes of representation. So I think it's all it's the same kind of principles apply. Simple, short, to the point. You get it, and you get there, and are you able to represent what you are about?
Thanks, Prof. We have a question in the chat about whether dissemination of manuscripts to one's undergraduate students is the same as communicating with the communication with the public.
Yeah, well, to some extent, I would say yes. And I like that is very good, actually, because it's a form of trying to see whether students actually have an understanding of what you say. And if it's slightly, what I like about what you say, they're slightly different is how could people like students, remember, students are also a community, an academic community in training, if you like, so they are able to read your manuscripts and interpret them and translate them into presentations. So that is very good. So, but here we're talking really about, the topic was about audiences beyond the walls of the academy, right? Your students also have the means and wherewithal to interpret and to have a basis for knowing concepts, knowing academic argumentation. So they're somewhat of a privileged one. But this is Prof, this is a very valuable exercise. Something, if I were to go back into teaching, I would do, actually. But also, we should see also going back to Prof Weber's action research and not taking our audiences as if they are not intelligent. Might be useful depending on what the topic is, giving it to range of audiences and see what they make out of it. And then having a discussion around it. It would constitute communicating with the public, but albeit in a very circumscribed. Here we're talking really about the large numbers you can reach through public communication channels, if you like. So I think it's a step towards that direction. Using some of those techniques could actually help. What do people understand from what you say is a very important element of clarifying your message. It could actually take you to writing a piece, doing something, an elongated TV or radio interview, doing some bit of TikTok yourself, a podcast, or a television documentary. where you're explaining the particular your research findings and what audience is made out of it rather.
Thanks so much for that, Prof. Kupe. I wondered if I could ask you a question which I think will be of interest to our participants, and that is, would you be able to illustrate by example of, because I do know that you have written actively on some aspects of media where we have, as a public, need to be aware and to create awareness, to highlight aspects which the public should be aware of. And how have you used journalism or writing media articles to showcase something which society needs to know about?
Yeah.
So, I mean, one that comes to mind is SABC, I think, but
okay.
I leave
Yeah.
you to choose.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay. No, I think that's a good example because I did write a lot of articles about SABC. So one of the things that people wouldn't understand, for example, that post 1994, the SABC is not a government broadcaster like it was during apartheid times. It was a voice of the apartheid government. The 1996 Constitution placed the SABC as a public broadcaster, not a state broadcaster. And the big difference is this: a state broadcaster broadcasts what the state and the politicians and the government of the day wants us to say. A public broadcaster takes a completely different view, says, what does the public want to know, including about the government and those things that the government does well and does not do very well. And that is the public. So it's owned by the public and not by the state. And it's a world of a difference. It's the difference between an authoritarian form of governance and a democratic form of governance. So when the SABC reports, it might say, okay, this is what the government says, or this is what business or says, and this is what the researcher says. But what is of public interest here? Now, the public interest is not a narrow interest. Is the public good, is democracy, is all of those things. So I did lots of pieces where I made those analogies between. So the state funded and controlled public broadcaster would never show you Nelson Mandela and would never show you the apartheid government of Frederick de Klerk in a bad light. But the SABC will show Cyril Ramaphosa in a bad light, or a university vice chancellor or whoever had done anything that was not in the public interest. So it's that kind of like trying to demonstrate to people what's the difference between different media forms and the implications for democracy and their ability to get a voice in. Public broadcaster must give a voice to all. That is why the SABC uses all of the 11 languages in radio and on television, whereas the state broadcaster under apartheid used Afrikaans and just English, and African languages were marginalized to the Bantustan broadcasters like Pope and all of that. Yeah.
Thanks, Prof. Kupe. Matabo, I'm not sure if this is an old hand. I know you're very young. Is that an old hand or is it
It's
a new
very
hand?
new.
Okay, Matabo, and that's going to be the last question.
Yeah, Prof. Menon, we at UP, there was an objection to old hand and new hand. So you know what is called now? A legacy hand.
Oh, that's why I clarified, because I know Matabo is young.
Yeah.
Thank you
Matabo?
very much. Yes, I would like to find out from Prof. Kupe whether he has ever been asked to comment either on radio or TV on an issue that maybe the broadcaster already has a side, and they want you to argue in line with what they think, not what you have found maybe from your research. They want you to align with their way of thinking. And how have you handled that if it happened to you?
Yeah, no, happened a few times. I won't mention names. So, but I remember two instances. So when I realized that that is the case, the first sentence I often make is, most of this is, all of it has been in English. I say, contrary to some beliefs, perhaps including yours. This is not the case. And let me tell you what the case is. So basically I disrupt the narrative, if you like. And that is a pushback thing. And also audiences like to hear that you're going to robustly contest something. And if the person insists on it and begins to what we call it editorializing, instead of being a journalist, begins to push a particular point of view and is clear, you can call them out and say no, but now you are actually in a sense insisting on an idea that might be yours. Your role actually is to mediate different views. And the role you hold, by the way, is wrong for the following reasons. So you really do, you can do a very nice, robust pushback in order also to expose. Remember, the journalist is supposed to be a conduit for the public. I always say that when I tell the people is that the journalist is not your audience. It's a person enabling you to reach an audience. So think about who is behind the media, behind the journalist, and who you are trying to reach. They will try, and people have their positionalities. But just simply, as you sit there in a TV studio on radio, just say, I'm talking to the audience at large. This person is just a facilitator.
We have a last question by Sinead Barnabas. Sinead, she's put it in the chat. When you advance a position at a particular point in time, and then you have a change and shift in thinking, how do you manage that? Sinead, have I communicated accurately?
Yes, thanks, Prof.
Yeah, no, I can see that. But I mean, like, typically, a change, Sinead, in your ideas might be because of more information you have had, more research or deeper research you have done. There's no harm in you actually saying, it's actually nice if you do say is that, although I used to think, or although at this point in time, this is what I thought was actually happening, and now I know better in that fashion. I think that really, this is where this particular thing is. And with hindsight, I can now say, so that is allowed. And people like it because that is also human. Although we're not only people always thought the same thing and never change. And then you can even write, if it's because you have been persuaded by others, that I'm now persuaded to a different view, that X, Y, Z is actually the best way of understanding. That also shows to the public and that you are a self-reflexive person, that you think through things, and that you can persuade and be persuaded. So no harm at all, actually.
Thanks,
Prof. Kupe, thank you. That brings us to the end of the session. And I think we could hold you ransom and keep you back and ask you, because we've just focused on the print media today. And I am aware that you are completely au fait with all the other media platforms. And a part of the message that we've had from you today is for us to remember the linkage between the university and society, and how to translate our research, which is for society, and no matter how difficult that may be to distill, but there is a value in communicating this knowledge to society. So I thank you very much on behalf of the FPP team, on behalf of all our participants. I can see that they've enjoyed themselves, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to invite you again and perhaps take a different angle, more practical and focused, where we can talk about what disciplines our FPPs come from and how would one work with that. But thank you very much. I'd like to remind all the participants to please complete the evaluation form. Prof. Kupe, thank you so much. And I'm glad that load shedding saved you and that we managed to have today's session. Thank you very, very much, everyone. Please go safe, be kind to everyone, and looking forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Thank you. Kevin, you can play us out with some music. Thanks, Prof.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me, and thank you for listening.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.